Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give it a few moments for some more people to log on, and then we'll get started. See the numbers jumping up. Thank you all for joining us on a Friday afternoon. We're so excited. Give it another minute or so. Great. Why don't we go ahead and get started with an introduction to the Yale Center for Environmental Justice by our Executive Director, Michael Galopter.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Zoe, very much. Did I blank out? No, okay, all right. Okay, I hope is it all working? Okay, good, sorry. Just my computer just told me it wasn't. Anyway, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. This is the second of 3 webinars we're having based on our Land Justice Toolkit, which has been several years in the making, and Katie Michels in particular on this call is one of the people who helped us architect it, as did Tegan, and we're very grateful for that. Thank you. We are the toolkit itself, I think, has 9 different tools and chapters, and we'll be doing building a website around it for people to use. But we chose 3 issue areas to highlight in particular, and the one today is community land trusts. Community land trusts have been particularly inspirational to us. Excuse me. At the center, we worked with John Smith a couple years ago on a grant application, and then also took some of the ideas we gained from that to try to do some work in Bridgeport with something called community energy trusts. In the energy transition, community ownership is really important as well, not just of land, but of energy resources in communities. In any case, in general, and I just testified on Capitol Hill yesterday, and I mentioned this there too. We have to think about in areas, hopefully, where we're making a lot of investments. The reality is that investment programs rarely benefit low-income communities, as unfortunately unmitigated urban growth also rarely benefits low-income communities. And so land trusts and collectivized ways of thinking about ownership and thinking about growth and development are really, really critical to having the best kind of growth, more democratic growth, more widespread growth. And I'm really excited for this panel in particular to cover those issues. And thank you all for being with us and for listening in and learning with us and helping, hopefully coming back with us to help us learn more as well. So with that, I'll pass it on to Tegan Engel, who is a fellow with our center as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. So glad you could be here. So my name is Tegan Engel. I am a community organizer around food justice and land justice issues, and I've been working with the Center for Environmental Justice on the past few years on this beautiful land justice and land trust toolkit. And our partners for this have been the Aspetuck Land Trust, in particular Reggie St. Four Collins, who is an amazing organizer in Bridgeport, Connecticut, who partnered with us to help create this, and the Center for Environmental Justice, as well as the Center for Business and the Environment at Yale, supported this work. And there are many, many people who contributed who are all acknowledged in the toolkit. And as Michael mentioned, there are 9 tools in this toolkit. And this is really geared towards land trusts and anyone working with land trusts to understand a spectrum of tools to help us implement different types of land justice, everything from cultural easements to community land trust to land back, and to understand what are these things, who are people in the country who are doing these well so that you can look to them for examples, and then some concrete, sometimes documents or examples of how to do that work. So we're really trying to make it easy for people to learn about these different land justice tools and how to implement them. And I just want to put this in context that most of us here in the US are sitting here on stolen land, and this land went from collective stewardship when Indigenous people were stewarding it to now being a commodity and being owned. And within that, a very typically unjust and unfair system of land ownership. And so what this toolkit is trying to do is actually give people concrete ways to try to address those injustices, and in particular for people who are holding land, whether it is land trusts or individuals holding land, concrete practices for how to do that. So very happy to have our guest here today, and I'm going to pass this over to Katie, who is going to be our moderator. And as Michael said, Katie really helped us on the last leg of this to do the writing and pull a lot of the resources together on this guide, and she has particular interest and experience with community land trust. So excited that you're here to moderate this conversation today.
Thank you, Tegan. And again, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So as Tegan said, my name's Katie, and I'm going to serve as moderator for this webinar, but my role is to speak as little as possible so we can mostly hear from John and Demetrius. I'm going to briefly introduce the goals for the webinar today and our plan for this next hour and 15 minutes we have together, and then I'll turn things over to our speakers. But as Tegan mentioned, our goal today is to really dig into the case of community land trusts in greater depth. What are they? How do they work? How do they support community visions? So we'll start by simply explaining what a community land trust is. We're going to do that by focusing in on two specific examples, the cases of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Roxbury, Massachusetts, which is near the city of Boston, and the Athens Land Trust in Athens, Georgia. We'll also strive along the way to explore and illustrate ways that conservation land trusts and community land trusts can work together and collaborate, because I know that's a topic of great interest for many of you on this call. So, like I said, our plan is to start by simply defining terms. Demetrius is going to help us with that. We're going to use this term land trust a lot, but what is a land trust? What is a community land trust? What is a conservation land trust? Demetrius is simply going to ground us in some shared definitions that we'll use over the course of our time together. Then John's going to dig in and speak specifically about the community land trust model and structure. Then we'll turn to the two cases of Dudley Street and the Athens Land Trust. John and Demetrius will explain their organizations, where they work, how they work, why they work. I'll ask a few questions to explore similarities and differences and try to get at this question of collaboration between different types of land trusts. And then hopefully by 1:55 Eastern time, so about 50 minutes from now, we'll open it up to questions from you all. But encourage you as we go to just simply put your questions in the chat. There's a Q&A function at the bottom that you can use to type your questions in. If you have a clarifying question, we'll strive to answer it over the course of our kind of like more preset time, but we'll save most questions for our time at the end in conversation. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce our two speakers and then turn it over to them. Demetrius Jordan is the executive director of the Athens Land Trust. He's based in Georgia. And John Smith is the executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative based in Massachusetts. I'm not going to say anything more about their organizations because they'll do it much more beautifully than I could, but they're both wonderful leaders, and I'm really honored to be able to work with them in preparing this webinar. And with that, I will turn things over to Demetrius. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. And certainly a pleasure to be on this webinar, and certainly to share this time with John as well. It's a great, I think, approach to think in grounding these very important terms: community land trust, conservation land trust. In fact, I would say for a good portion of this webinar, we'll probably use CLT in short, and oftentimes we'll be referring to community land trusts, right, for the purpose of this discussion. But I do want to just kind of help ground us, and the reason why I'm excited about that is because although it's a relatively new concept, meaning coming again out of the civil rights movement, 1969, some of the first community land trusts, but it has grown in certainly popularity as a resource. And so, which means now is a really good time to make some clarifying statements about what we all mean and are talking about. So first, for community land trusts, so community land trusts are nonprofits, organizations that hold land in a trust permanently. Right? The idea is to ensure long-term housing affordability, equitable land access, and community control. So, so this means that land is removed out of the speculative market. That's an important element to sort of key on, and owned by community land trust in perpetuity. So particularly we're talking about homes or buildings on the land may be leased or sold under long-term agreements, but the land remains a community asset, and that's and determined by the community on how it is used. And so as it relates to conservation land trusts, right? So also nonprofits that conserve land through acquisition or easements to protect natural, agricultural, and scenic value, if you will, for future generations. So if you think about these two, they're really important in understanding it is about permanently or in perpetuity ensuring that land is protected. And in this case, again, conservation land remains under the ownership of the landowners, but stewarded and monitored by a conservation land trust, as opposed to the community land trust, which are owned by the community or the community land trust, but again, is actually to provide ongoing permanently affordable housing, which is really key and important. So, so just wanted to make those again distinguish, and we'll talk a little bit more about what Athens Land Trust does. But that's one of the things that's also unique about some of the work we do, because we do try to better understand how we weave those very important land trust models together. Land for people, so which is really important. So I hope that adds a little bit of clarity as we sort of ground ourselves in the community land trust model.
Super. Thanks, Demetrius. So with that, let's turn it over to John to really dig in even more to the community land trust model and how it works.
Definitely. Thank you, Katie, for that. And first of all, let me thank the folks at the Yale Center, Zoe, Tegan, Katie, and Michael for hosting this and inviting both Demetrius and myself to be here. Really honored to do that. John Smith, I'm the Executive Director, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which folks call DSNI. DSNI is in Roxbury, Massachusetts, basically right outside of the city limits of downtown Boston. And that organization was established in 1984. So just celebrated 40 years last year. Many people have studied, looked at, visited, come by to see the SNI. I think for a lot of reasons. It was the first community land trust in the country that gained eminent domain. And that happened really because, there was a really strong movement by the residents who lived in that area, primarily Black and brown folks, who were really, adamant about taking back their community. And because there was so many years of disinvestment, and people were burning homes and dumping litter, and they were really adamant about just being able to take back their community. And more than that, they were really adamant about controlling the land around there. So again, the first community-based land trust in the country that was granted eminent domain by the mayor at that time, Mayor Flynn, who we celebrated last year at our 40th anniversary. And as as Demetrius mentioned, CLT is a nonprofit, basically community-based organization. Usually, like in our case, they're governed by a board of residents and folks in and around some businesses, if there's nonprofits that represent that community at large. And they work to basically ensure that community held decision making and shared equity home ownership is really held up as a standard and a model. They usually acquire and secure property with renewable crown leases. In our case, it's 99 years, and ensure housing affordability in perpetuity. So that provides a really powerful platform for stability and also community wealth building. And it shifts leadership and power decision making over to residents, which really helps them to control growth and development and really stave off the potential impacts of gentrification, um, such as any kind of displacement. So it's really important in our case, in the case of DSNI. DSNI, again, established in '84, established the Community Land Trust 4 years later. And the Community Land Trust that stewards land on behalf of the community is called DNI, Dudley Neighbors Incorporated. The part of what they steward we call the Dudley Triangle. And from its inception until now, we have established, I can give you the numbers. We have established basically, in terms of housing, there's 101 affordable houses, 139 affordable rentals. There's a 10,000 square foot greenhouse, 2 urban farms, and 3 community gardens, 2 commercial spaces, and 2 open spaces that are just sort of parks. So how we work is that the SNI, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, really works to empower the Dudley residents, the folks, to organize, plan for, and create this neighborhood. So we do sort of the community development and planning. And the NI, which stewards land on behalf of the residents, they implement the community revitalization plans of Dudley Street. And overall, we work hand in hand to make sure that we can do development without displacement. So including developing the housing and the urban space and the other amenities in the Dudley Triangle. We just finished 2 days ago, our annual 2 years, every 2 years, we elect new residents to the board. There are 35 members of the board. They are all community residents. There are folks who live on the land trust or live close around the land trust. We have representative businesses that are sort of right around the triangle. So my bosses, I have 35 bosses essentially, and so it's a really interesting space to be in. But yeah.
Super. Thanks, John. Thanks for both, kind of big picture how CLTs work and then also teasing how Dudley Street is structured. So I might give you a chance to catch your breath and turn it over to Demetrius and ask him to talk about how Athens Land Trust got its start, and where kind of just tell us a little bit more, as John did, about Athens, Georgia, in the context of where you work.
Sure. Yeah, so Athens Land Trust, it's a little over 30 years old. Started in 1994, really inspired by a group of local Athenians. So if you've never heard of what we call the good residents of Athens, Athenians, who had a similar shared understanding about the value of land and housing, and what it meant to share and be a part of a community that valued what land could do for its people, for the people who lived in those areas. And so beginning in an area called Kinney Ridge, really inspired again by the new communities incorporated, which was the first community land trust in the US, in the state of Georgia, in Albany, Georgia, actually, and as an effort to preserve farmland owned and run by Black farmers. This was about economic empowerment of Black communities in 1969, ensuring again that people could determine their future. And so with that inspiration, Athens really becoming home to a similar model of community land trust. And so since then, the Athens Land Trust has helped over 200 families in stabilized housing. We have currently about 70 affordable housing units. About 53 of those are actually homes, many of which some Athens Land Trust actually built using, again, earthcrafts model of construction, providing, again, environmentally friendly and safe housing, as well as affordable rental. So we have about, again, additional 17 units there. We're currently actually, August 1st, we actually have a ribbon cutting for 5 new homes that we have, that we've built, that are, again, for affordable housing. But with that is the support for the home buyer, right? So housing counseling, credit repair, financial literacy, all of some of the bedrock tools, if you will, and support for individuals and their families so that they can successfully transition into a home and own a home that they can call their own, and build a kind of financial stability that creates the opportunity for wealth creation, generational wealth, and so on. And so that's again extremely important to remember, again, sort of why we certainly do this. But with that said, there were a few ideas that we could not escape, and that is the value of land when it comes to conservation, ensuring that even with the homes that were built and provided for homeowners and created opportunities, was green space nearby the homes that communities could enjoy. And actually, again, as we talk about not just the homes themselves, but being a part of a community and what it means for green space to do that. But also our local food systems, and how do we engage access to local food systems, particularly for folks that may not have it regularly, that may not be regularly available, but also creating opportunities where individuals, again, can grow their own food. So our community agricultural pillar becomes another important element to the entire sort of, if you will, sort of spectrum of the community land trust. So it's exciting to think about certainly not only the work that has been done. Our land conservation, we currently conserve and protect about 20,000 acres throughout the state of Georgia. And as we talk a little bit more about our community land trust, I do want to mention about the challenge that we certainly face. There's a significant gap in the inventory of affordable housing, and certainly the need here in, particularly even in Athens. We could say it for the entire state, we could say it for the entire country, but it is a significant gap. And so Athens is a charming small town that is rich in culture and music. You think about the B-52s, for example, or REM, that got their base here as an artsy community. But now it can be very costly. It's very difficult to live, if you will, in Athens, Georgia. The affordability is out of reach for many residents here. And so while we are committed to providing affordable housing to individuals who earn 80% of average income in the area, we know that most of our residents are actually closer to 35% of average income in the area. So we're proud to be able to provide that kind of support and that kind of legacy of housing. But we've got a big challenge ahead of us, and this is one solution that we believe sort of adds value. The Community Land Trust, but we've got quite a bit of work ahead of us.
Super. Thanks, Demetrius. I'd like to ask both of you to talk to get into some of the tools that you use to accomplish your work and support affordable housing and affordable access to land. So maybe John, I'll have you go first and then Demetrius, but could you talk about some of the legal and other tools that help DSNI make housing affordable?
Sure, thank you for that. Primarily, we are funded through philanthropic dollars and donors. In the early, in the beginning, there was a lot of state and city investment because the organization was actually building houses and staking off land, and that has sort of dissipated over the years. And so our funding mechanisms are primarily right now philanthropic. And we, over the past 40 years, have built out most of our land. So right now, our challenge is sort of making sure that sustainability, it's been 40 years and, there's a lot of capital projects that we try to help homeowners with, that can go from failing roofs to retaining walls and things like that. There is, as a part of the community line of the SNI, there is the Greater Boston Land Trust Network, which we basically house, and they do a lot of the policy work. So they work with about 6 or 7 other land trusts, and they do a lot of advocacy and policy work on the behalf of us and the other land trusts to get things in the budget, state and city budget, to help us do our work. They've been successful in getting, a couple of years ago, a line item that helped, set up a fund, an acquisition fund that we've been trying to build over the last 2-3 years. So that's important. That's been important. They're working on bills, at the state right now that really accentuate sort of permanent affordability and getting more state support behind that. So it's really a combination of working sort of private philanthropy, working with donors, but also doing more advocacy at the state and city level.
Yeah. I'll add, one of the most important tools that we use in this work is certainly the ground leases. The 99-year ground leases, which are absolutely designed to ensure, again, permanent affordability, as well as to protect the land against, again, the speculative market. So we acquire the land, or the land is donated to us. In some cases, the land is donated or acquired with a building or home on it already that may require rehab, rehabilitation. But once we have identified and we're in possession of the land itself, and we can provide, again, a home, we provide, again, what's a 99-year ground lease that ensures a couple things. One, that the family, the homeowners, can pass it on to their children if they like. They can build equity in the home itself. But by having that 99-year ground lease, it protects that land. Again, we are committed as as an example, the land trust, like the Athens Land Trust, we are committed to actually supporting, at least ensuring that that land is made available. Now, we do what some would say is maybe symbolic. Our ground leases are $60 for the year, right? So, so there's not that burden on the family in having access. But if the family decides they love the stability that they've been able to build themselves, they want to move, they want to, and it could be for whatever reason, we get to retain that land so that we can offer it its affordability to another family that is looking for the kind of stability that owning a home can provide. So, so that 99-year ground lease is essential to this entire model.
And to back up Demetrius's point, we have actually the same model of the 99-year ground lease. And it's really significant because, you know, the Boston Foundation, one of our bigger local foundations here, you know, they just did in 2024, the home indicators report, and they note, actually, one of the top lines is that first-time home buyers can't find affordable homes, growing families face challenges finding larger houses, and empty nesters are often challenged to find properties where they can downsize. So each group has limited options, which means they can't move and free up homes that are highly sought by other groups. And in the end, prices rise as inventory stagnates. And, you know, in terms of our inventory, it's stagnating, you know. So we find that, to Demetrius's point, having that 99-year lease really gives folks access and opportunity, you know, especially as we're thinking about resale and that kind of thing. So that, I think, is a really important aspect of CLTs. The challenge, however, is the wealth challenge, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, or at least folks sort of philosophically thinking about how much wealth does that actually build. Yeah.
John, I think you should go there. Can you talk a little bit about the wealth challenge?
Sure. So we have faced that over the years, and I think we should squarely just say that, you know, CLTs are really, it's really sort of a social policy. And our goal is really, it's the kind of social housing that really sort of counteracts like the negative impacts of racialized planning and land use and real estate development, which for all of us, I think in all our cities, are compounded by speculative land practices and all of that. And I feel like, so part of it is that what you get into a CLT house at a much lower price. If you think about average price of a home in Boston, which is $900,000, sometimes upwards of that, you will not pay that for a house on the land trust. And so over time, what we have noticed and what we've heard from folks is that, you know, not being in a space where you're paying these outsized mortgages, but that you're able to sort of save, really helps them develop, you know, the capacity to then move on if they want to buy another house, if they want to leave the land trust and really start somewhere else. So we see, and we have seen over the years that folks, you know, they're able to pay their mortgage, they're able to stay stable, but they're also able to save. And in actually the 40 years since the SNI was established, then DNI, there's only been 4 foreclosures in the whole time that folks have been there, even at the height of the foreclosure crisis. So, you know, there are tendencies to think about wealth really from the perspective of just, you know, people being able to maximize their home prices and doing all. We sometimes don't think about the stability that sort of goes into wealth building, the ability to create projects and, you know, that make sure they serve our community, you know. And I think that that is an equation that we don't put into this whole idea of building wealth and the whole idea of them saving. And they talk about that. Folks will talk about that that they're able to save more because of not having to do that mortgage. So while you cannot buy a house for $250,000 and resell it for $1 million, there is a formula that goes into how much you can resell your house for. And you cannot just, because if we do that, then we might as well all be market rate. So, and that's not what we're fighting for. We're fighting for, affordable homeownership in perpetuity, and we're fighting for stability and for people to have the opportunity to gain sort of access and opportunity in case they want to move on.
And if I can just add a little bit of an additional context to that, John, most Americans are a rear end car accident, injury away from really going under. The idea of the cost of not only of healthcare, among many things, as you mentioned about the importance of a stabilization, having savings. In the South, we still call it a rainy day fund. So and what that means to a family, because those are oftentimes the barriers. Again, the unforeseen accident, the health crisis, the damage to one's home that you can't repair, or the things that happen in our normal day-to-day lives are the things that tend to derail us. And so for many of our residents, the ability to ensure that if we can help make sure that your costs, your housing cost is below 20%, 15% of your revenue. And we know that there's an opportunity to not only build savings, but maybe acquire another certification, get additional education, support for your children to have a tutor or support or educational support, to start a small business, micro enterprise. I mean, we have, and I always love to brag on one of our homeowners, and she's got this amazing bakery. It's called Jazzy Cakes, and we have an opportunity when we have events to buy from her. But you create these new opportunities that establish a foundation for stabilization, which is what one needs if you're going to begin to talk truly about what generational wealth could mean, or establishing, again, a foundation for wealth building. But John, you're absolutely right, is, the idea of how we think about wealth, and how we think about housing stabilization. There is a manner of reflection that we all have to do to understand what that means, but what we are providing is that stabilized housing.
Super. Thank you both. So one other question, this is partly pulled from the chat, and then we'll move away from this kind of basic tools discussion, but I'll let whoever wants to answer this decide, but just in a minute or two, could you talk about, how people apply or buy into the Community Land Trust? And then, John, you hinted at this, but if and when somebody wants to move, what is the process for moving out of the Community Land Trust?
Go ahead, Demetrius, if you.
Sure. So our program is for first-time home buyers. We begin with info sessions if you want to learn more about home ownership. We also have housing counseling opportunities if you want to, again, learn more about. And again, our interestingly enough, we have quite a bit of attendees for just wanting to learn and understand about what are the steps that are necessary to actually become a homeowner. And again, sort of first-time homeownership. So we have amazing financial institution partners that we work with, who assist in first-time homeowner down payment assistance, which is also another barrier for many families to gain access to a home. And who also who are lenders for homeowners, again, and home buyers themselves. And so So that is, sometimes it takes time in this process. Maybe it's a credit repair. But along the steps, along the journey of home ownership, we do provide, again, counseling and guidance and regular communication to ensure one, that families are knowledgeable, aware about the process, understand what's going on, and two, are prepared for the obligations themselves. So in our 30 years, we haven't had one foreclosure. Of all of the homes that we have certainly not only built, but have been a part of providing for our residents.
That's marvelous.
Yeah, pretty much the same for us. So when properties become available, if it's a new property and that's declining because of just the availability of land, what we do is we work with the city to sort of market it. And there's lots of tools that the city can help us use to put it on the market and advertise it and all that. Then so folks can apply. There's an application process. There are other organizations like MAHA and a couple other folks who do a lot of first-time homebuyer training, and all of that. So it's basically a lottery that you have to win to get onto the land trust at this point. The resales basically work. It's a 99-year lease, as Demetrius said. We have the same thing, and you can resell that to someone else. What's factored in are things like if you own on a community land trust and ours, you own the house itself. You don't own the land. You pay a land lease. But the house you can modify, you can change, you can add rooms, all of that gets factored in to the resale cost. It's capped, but it all gets factored in. And yeah, so that's how we do it. And then there's a whole process to sell it, we hold it, and then resell it to someone else new who's coming in. That's how it basically works.
Super.
And yeah, MAHA, so someone put in here, it's the Affordable Housing Alliance, correct? Mass Affordable Housing Alliance.
Great, thank you. So I want to shift to the topic of governance. I think the governance of community land trusts is really intriguing. And so, and John, I'm going to have you go first since you said you have 35 board members, but could you just talk a little bit about your governance structure, what those board members are doing and thinking about, and how you make sure they all have voices and decision-making over your organization?
Sure, thanks. They have different committees. So there are different, the Sustainable Development Committee, which basically looks at anybody who wants to either modify their home or build something in and around the land trust basically comes to what's called the Sustainable Development Committee, where they get to vet what is going up in and around the community. So that's one committee. There's an organizing committee that looks at different issues that are happening right now. There's a trash transfer station that's causing some issues for some of the residents. And there's going to be some organizing around that. And we're going to build out some more committees, education committee. There are committees that do things every year since we stopped during the pandemic, but every year since then, we have a multicultural festival. So every year in the summer, height of summer in August, we have a multicultural festival that we do. And then there are committees built up to support that. So in terms of decision-making, they're very much involved in sort of the strategic direction of the organization. So we, for instance, are now focusing on what would it take for our community to survive some major climate incident? And that could be anything, for the folks who know anything about where Boston is situated, we could be waterlogged very easily. All of us could be underwater just because of how the city is built. And so we're thinking about what does a climate resilience hub look like for a neighborhood. So the residents are helping to inform that process. They're very clear about what they would want to see if something happened. We are thinking about things like retrofitting those houses, and how we can get resources in to help residents do that. That includes things like solar, and there's so many new technologies now about water soluble sidewalks and different things that we're trying to build out. So it's the energy retrofits, but it's also social in the sense of the key, I think, for us will be, can we either purchase, build some sort of structure that will survive a sort of major climate crisis, which we're calling a resilience hub within the community that folks can go to, where they will have access to information, but also, food and water and all the things that are needed. Wi-Fi came up as a big thing. Health. So we're working with a local hospital right on the border of our community to help us to think through like the health impacts. So all of those things that get factored in. And the community has a voice in that. So everything we do has to be sort of centered around the community voice and what they would like to see. So I can propose, hey, let's do a climate resilience hub. Now let's pull people in and sort of explain what that means and then plan together with them. And actually, in real time right now, we're doing that process.
Great. Thanks, John. Demetrius, maybe in 2 minutes or so, describe Athens governance model.
Sure, we have a board of directors, 15 members. We are also required to have a third of our members as residents of the communities that we serve. We do have multiple committees that are designed to help guide the direction of Athens Land Trust in our acquisition of land. But we also have, which are really essential to do this work, community engagement is paramount. So we do have community advisory boards that represents the interest of different parts of Athens, Georgia. And they work on a range of projects, anything from ensuring that there's proper lighting in the neighborhoods and the communities, their engagement with law enforcement, their local schools, and also the community advisory boards work really closely and engaging our local elected officials as well, so which play an important role. Because we are largely and heavily funded through HUD dollars and community block grants, CDBG funds, it becomes essential that our board members and our community advisory board members are actively engaged in the decisions and the direction of the land trust.
Great. Thanks both. And CDBG is Community Development Block Grant, which is a federal funding program. So I want to switch to the topic of land access. You've both kind of hinted at this in describing how each of your organizations work, but I'd like you to talk more about how you've secured land for the Community Land Trust. And also, just given that many of the folks on this webinar work for conservation land trusts, are there any ways that you've seen conservation land trusts and community land trusts work well together? Maybe Demetrius, I'll send this to you because you kind of explode that binary.
So land access. So really quickly on the conservation land trust side, so the land itself is provided by the landowner. They retain ownership of the land, but we monitor and steward it through what's called a conservation easement. We strike an agreement in how this land will not be developed, but provided, again, whether it be agriculture or wetlands or natural lands. We help to enforce, or at least we help the landowner to ensure that they abide by the conservancy of that land. On the community land trust side, certainly it is we have developers in the community, and they are oftentimes, it's a market-driven environment. We understand what it means in the space of gentrification and how individuals and families sometimes lose access to their homes. And so it can become a competitive environment. So we do work with our local county government. We work with our housing development authority to gain access, if you will, to land that may be available. We also receive contributions, donations of land itself, planned giving. We have individuals who have an amazing sense of vision and courage, and have provided lands that they once owned and have donated that land to Athens Land Trust, specifically for affordable housing. But we are also always actively out there searching. We ask our board members to be a part of that process. As I mentioned, some of the parcels we acquire ourselves. We will buy them, but we work closely again with our housing and community development to not only to access, but to access the resources to develop that land. So gaining access, I mean, that's a little bit of the struggle. That's where we all are sort of in that boat, and how we can gain access and protect that land. But once we have it, rest assured that land will be made available for the people.
For us, it's a little bit, the focus now is taking houses off the speculative market. I mean, for DSNI, DNI, we're limited in the sense that the land that we have that they gain by eminent domain mostly is built out. And so we, based on our bylaws, can't really go beyond our footprint. So we are, but working through the network, the greater Boston Land Trust Network, we're working with them, starting this fund for them to do acquisitions and development, and some pre-development. We are able to help them to take houses off the speculative market. And that's really where we focus right now. Most of our work is really working with them to do that.
And John, can you just expand a little bit on how you're taking houses off the speculative market? Like, what funds are you using to do so?
Sure. Again, mostly philanthropic, but also we started a fund like an acquisition fund. So philanthropic dollars, we got some state, we got some determination of need funds from a couple of the local hospitals. So they're using those funds and actively searching for other institutions to help develop that fund. We're thinking about a credit facility with a national bank who is working right now to help us develop that. So those are the sources that we're using to help make that happen. I don't think any of us as land trusts can walk in and just pay $1 million and say, take this house, or, so they source, different foreclosures, word of mouth, different folks who are able to sell. Some of the residents may know about some properties that are available. So it's really just trying to make sure, as we talk about the model, as we talk about the work, that we sort of get leads from folks in the community sometimes, or different organizations will let us know that these are available. Part of it too is using what we found over the last couple of years is that, just as we're doing now, talking about the land trust model, that folks are now coming and kind of telling us, hey, we'd love to do a land trust. We know about this, we know about that. So different parts of different communities around Massachusetts are coming now. And so it's sort of helping them with some technical assistance, making sure that, they're able to understand how you actually build and run a land trust. And they are getting inquiries from folks about how you actually, can I put my house in a land trust, those kinds of things. So it's happening. on various and different levels.
That's so exciting to hear. Thanks. So I have one last question for you two, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So Tegan put this in the chat, but for folks listening, please do keep adding your questions in. We'll have some time in just a few minutes to get to them. But maybe I'll go first, Demetrius, and then John. I'd love to just have you two reflect a little bit about what success looks like for your organizations and how you think the Community Land Trust model is a tool for achieving that. So Demetrius first, and then John.
Yeah, so success for Athens Land Trust is, again, healthy, stable communities where individuals feel a sense of dignity and pride in their neighborhoods, their homes, and without the threat of losing their homes or access. These are the communities that folks live in, and so while we currently have, as I mentioned before, roughly about 70 housing units, we want to grow and expand and scale that. As I mentioned, we've the challenge and the depth of need continues to grow, and so we want to not only be a part of closing that gap, but we also want to partner with organizations who have that same commitment, that same drive to ensuring that we're providing affordability and stabilization to our neighbors.
I think sort of writ large for us is that we believe that community land trust can sort of develop economic hubs in neighborhoods, to expand this whole idea of community wealth. So, gaining more assets, whether it's setting up incubators where folks, who want to do small business and small business development for them, that's become over time much more important to us too. That it's not just that it's wonderful that we have the land and the housing, but now we're also thinking about business development and making sure that those assets are in place. That's one level. I think the other part is just us thinking through, how we can, keep this model, expand and keep this model financed, that becomes important, especially at with federal and state cutbacks in some places. I think we want to keep working at that level. I think just, continue to mitigate sort of gentrification and displacement for folks through this work and facilitate intergenerational wealth building amongst low-income and just working class folks. We think it's important to have the stability of the housing, but also to develop small businesses to buttress that for them.
And if I can add just, something I did forget to mention, we have this this very unique and interesting approach to how land, again, provides for the people. And there is this sort of three sort of threaded pillar. We call it our strategic impact pillars, but as we think about the housing, as we think about certainly conservation, and as we think about agriculture, those are three really important threads that everyday people are trying to navigate. And so at Athens Land Trust, we've been working to sort of not only thread those sort of carefully together, but to demonstrate sort of how families and communities and neighborhoods benefit when they have the stabilized housing that's connected again to the green space or the access to foods. All of those, they do matter in a very interesting way. And so as we see our communities, our neighborhoods really begin to flourish in that way, we'd like to grow it and scale it, right? So that when homes are sowed and provided and so on, that there's support for their local garden, in their home. I mean, in their yard, if you will. That there is again a safe place that creates a sense of creativity and a sense of community in the local park, for example, and that we get to be a part. The community determines how it actually conserves that land, and so. But yeah, I'm glad that was sort of, I was reminded by, when we think about success, success for us is when we see the proper alignment of those three.
Beautiful. Thank you, Demetrius. So I'm just going to share a couple notes about some opportunities to learn more, and then we'll open it up for questions. So again, encourage folks to type your questions in the Q&A function. But, you know, the goal of this past, it's amazing, we've already spent an hour together, but the goal of this past hour was really to dig into Athens Land Trust and the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and understand how these two models work, how you're driven and defined by the interests of your communities. There's a lot of incredible resources that explain how to start a community land trust, some model bylaws, kind of more written description of the structure and the governance. And so some of that is described in the toolkit. Tegan's also going to put a couple of links to some specific web resources that have really helpful written documentation about community land trusts. So there's some links that you can use to learn more. I also want to acknowledge that we have been joined for the past hour by two leading lights in the community land trust movement, Greg Rosenberg and John Emmaus Davis, who are both involved in what's now known as the International Center for Community Land Trusts, have been with us. And so, John or Greg, if you have any thoughts you want to add, please put them in the chat, but also just want to thank you for your work. And the International Center for Community Land Trusts has a great resource library and case studies of community land trusts from all over the world. And this really is a global movement. So those links are coming in the chat, and I'm going to turn it over briefly to Zoe to just share a couple of notes, and then we'll open it up to questions. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you, Katie. And just, of course, my deepest gratitude to John, Demetrius, and yourself, Katie, for leading this wonderful discussion. It was such a great kind of way to put out the toolkit, but also to hear more about your organizations. For anyone on this call, this will be recorded and put on the YCEJ YouTube channel, and I'll send that email to you as well. And you can also access our previous webinar, Understanding Agricultural and Cultural Respect Easements, on that YouTube as well. While we're talking, I also want to promote our next webinar in the series, which is Understanding Land Back as a Tool for Land Justice. That'll be July 17th, and that link will come in the chat to register as well. Please join us for that conversation moderated by Chuck Sams, who's our incoming Director of Indigenous Programs at YCEJ. I'd also like to just say thank you to Phoebe Herring, to Reggie St. Fort Collin, to Professor Gerald Torres, to Kristen Berendreck Ludwig, sorry, I want to make sure I pronounce that correctly, and all the other wonderful collaborators that contributed to this toolkit. And of course, thank you so much to my partner, Tegan Engel, who this work would not have been possible without both the toolkit and this webinar series. So thank you so much, and visit our website to keep up with more information. And with that, please drop your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them.
Thanks, Zoe. So we have a great question from River. And I'm going to ask it, and Demetrius and John, I'd love for you both to answer this because this is a really good question. River, sorry. River asks, how would you get started in establishing a land trust? How do you decide whether to create a community land trust or a conservation land trust, particularly given the Athens Land Trust focus on conservation, food systems, ag work, and affordable housing? So maybe actually, Demetrius, you can take the first crack, and then John, you can chime in.
Sure. Yeah, I can only tell you a little bit about what Athens Land Trust, again, the approach, the need and the will to establish a community, was paramount. So these are, again, families, individuals who got together in Athens and in a community to ensure, one, that the land that they were on would be protected in perpetuity, and that they could build a community that they were proud of, which included certainly thoughts and ideas around community agriculture and conservation of the land. So looking for a tool or a mechanism for legally protecting the land was certainly important there. But I'd start, the idea of sort of how do you get started? One, I think you're doing a great job just being here and gaining more information about what the tools are, what the models are, identifying whether a community land trust or a conservation land trust is really about the problem or the challenge that you're looking to address in your local community. The affordability, housing affordability is key. Again, we're seeing the rising costs across the country, but it's certainly a very local issue. But as it relates to conservation land, we spend an inordinate amount of time of raising awareness among landowners about the challenges we face. In the state of Georgia, we rank actually among the top 5 states in loss of farmland. So we're losing farmland and agriculture in a very significant way, which also has a deep, as I mentioned, for impact on our food systems. And so we've just taken that approach because what it meant for community is actually what the community asked for, needed, and wanted. So I wish I had a better answer for you, River, but certainly I would start with, where are we as a community, and what is it that we want to actually, how do we want to protect the land that's around us?
Don't sell yourself short, Demetrius. That was a great answer. John, what might you add?
River, great question. Thank you. I think sometimes it depends on where you sit, where you're situated, right? So the example, I say that because sometimes, so in Boston, Cambridge, sort of the surrounding communities, there is no sort of land. There's not a whole lot of land that it's all, most of it is held by private speculators and private businesses. So there's not like readily available land. So when people come to us, what they're really talking about is, I think we all know, is that in terms of economic inequality, whether you measure that through sort of gaps in income or wealth between rich and poor, it continues to widen. So people are sort of like, how do I hold on? I want to continue to live in this community. So what folks are primarily doing is using sort of community groups. So I can tell you, for instance, in Boston, there's a lot of neighborhood association groups. There's a lot of different immigrant community groups. There's a lot of folks who come to us through that way to say, we'd like to figure out how to put either houses or buy houses or stuff, and then put them to a trust so people can retain their housing. So it really is, to Demetrius's point, building a community. So not sure where you're situated here, but whatever community you're living in, or have some tentacles, some soft touches with, you can build that community by teaching folks about what actually a community land trust does, how it can help in terms of stability. So part of it is the education. We always start with the education, like we're doing here. And then, from that, it just becomes, the idea of, we want to maintain this housing sort of long-term for this community. So everyone sort of starts from that place. So it's building out that community wherever you are, and then trying to figure out how you want to approach it. Who are the people? Many times it's the city that folks live in. So we had an approach recently from folks in Cambridge. We encouraged them to talk to folks at the city of Cambridge, and then sort of see how they can support each other, in building that out. Like if folks are at danger of losing their homes, and, doing presentations to different groups and so forth, that's usually where it starts.
Great, thanks both. And I suppose one thing I might just add on this question is, it's always worth too just looking at what organizations are currently working in the place where you live, and you know, it sounds like they might not be serving exactly the needs that you've identified, but are there opportunities for existing organizations to evolve or grow their mission in a way that meets the interests you're trying to serve? Because one thing I'll say is starting a nonprofit 501c3, be it a conservation land trust, a community land trust, is very resource intensive. And so always worth thinking about how you can partner with others. One other question, and this might be our last question, but question about kind of the, you know, Demetrius, you talked about the three-legged approach of Athens Land Trust. John, you have, you know, housing, economic development. Would like for you both to reflect just on the integration around the legs of your stools, if they're stools or whatever metaphor you want to use. But for instance, like with the Athens Land Trust, would residents ever interact with a community garden, or what sort of cross-pollination is there across the multiple parts of your missions? So maybe Demetrius first and then John.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about, you know, when you asked the question, you know, one of the things we really do think about in Athens, we think about what the land provides, right? So the land provides a foundation for a home, right? Talk about stability. It also provides growth of, you know, the foods that are harvested and grown and so on. But it also provides this kind of this beauty that stimulates creativity and togetherness, and so so when you begin to think about those things, and all of those are the things that we need as people, you know, just as communities, the shelter, the food, the relationships, the socialization. So at the heart of that becomes the land and the people. And so how we integrate those, you know, again, there are various ways. We have this amazing network of BIPOC farmers that we work with throughout the state of Georgia, and we get to hear their stories and supporting, providing support with capacity building and connecting them to distributors and for the foods that they grow and that they harvest. And so and then even as we think about our residents and you know, the homeowners being a part of this, again, this ecosystem, gaining access to the foods. You know, we have an incubator, a farming incubator program where we not only teach about farming, but the business of farming as well, and connecting those incubators to our local farmers markets. Yeah. And they're all centered right there in the same general vicinity, the same neighborhoods, right? The same community. So it's not a stretch to think about how these pillars, or these impacted, really integrate with one another. They integrate about as well as the diversity and uniqueness of we as people are. Right. So we are all of those things. We need all of those things. And so my suggestion and just recommendation is being intentional about it. And so, and we have that opportunity here in Athens to do that.
So cool. Thank you. John, how about you?
So earlier I mentioned that in terms of urban agriculture, we have a 10,000 square foot greenhouse. We have 2 urban farms and 3 community gardens. That greenhouse is basically run by a project in Boston called the Food Project. And they basically work on connecting youth, food, and community. So they have, they employ like sometimes, I think about 100 to 120 young people who do meaningful work on the farm and work in that greenhouse over the summer months. They also have partnering with the residents in that Dudley neighborhood. They have set aside some space for folks to plant and, you know, grow their own food, and they actually sell that back into community. So that's one. And they use the community gardens. The community gardens are really run by the residents. So that is really built up. They run that. We will help them convene. They will have meetings. We'll talk about different things, but it's really all run by residents. So we believe that, there's this element of food justice, environmental justice, community well-being that we combined. In fact, one of the founders, one of the initial folks who were involved in the founding of GSNI, said for them, it was really an environmental justice issue initially, that there was so much dumping and so much, that the land was just, becoming more and more toxic. So, and there were people living there. And so there's the idea that we probably, if we had let this continue, we could then never use this land again for anything. So that was one of the motivating factors. So he describes DSNI, interestingly enough, of the first environmental justice organization. So, and we're still in that space in many ways, which connects to our climate work. So the food access is really being able to help young people learn about that, but also helping the community and the residents grow something that they can sell back into community. That also becomes very important. And so continuing in that tradition of sort of environmental justice, thinking about the community, using the land in a way that's productive for the residents and those, around that area, that all leads into our focus now on building up more avenues for community wealth building.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. Those were beautiful kind of closing comments about, I think, the power of the community land trust movement and how it thinks about all of these things together. Because it's like that quote, you can't just pull on one thread, right? Without everything falling apart. So thanks for closing us on that note. And thanks for spending, the last hour and 15 minutes, John and Demetrius, spending your time and thoughts and sharing your beautiful work with our attendees. So big thanks, round of applause virtually. And I'm going to turn it over to Zoe for a couple of closing comments.
Thank you everyone again for attending, and thank you all for coming to speak on this Friday afternoon. Just as I mentioned, this recording will be posted probably early next week, and I'll send an email reminder with that. And with that, that's the end of our discussion. So thank you all so much. And there's some coming in the Q&A section.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Zoe, Katie, Tegan.
Thank you both so much. This was fabulous. You shared so many gems of knowledge. Appreciated.
Thanks, all of you. It's really wonderful to participate in this. Yeah.
And have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care.
Take care. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. I think there's people still on, so bye.